Hey guys, tonight we're setting out on a long, slow journey across one of the greatest networks ever built by human hands, the Royal Road of the Persian Empire. Imagine yourself standing under a sky so wide it feels like it could swallow you whole. The air still, except for a distant clatter of hooves. Somewhere out there, between the mountains of Anatolia and the plains of Mesopotamia, a message is already racing ahead of you, sealed in wax, stamped with the mark of a king. You probably won't survive this trip if you try it in sandals, but thankfully, you're only traveling in your imagination tonight. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the edge of the ancient city of Sardis, the western terminus of the Royal Road. The air smells faintly of dust and olive oil, and the morning light glows golden against the tiled rooftops. Before you stretches a highway that seems impossibly straight, a stone ribbon stretching eastward toward the heart of the empire. It is said that a message could travel from here to Susa, over 2,700 kilometers away, in just 7 days. You try not to think about how your modern postal service sometimes takes longer to deliver a birthday card. As you begin walking, the rhythm of your steps falls in with the thud of invisible hooves. This is no ordinary path. Beneath the surface, carefully laid stones keep the road level, even across rivers and deserts. The Persians didn't invent long roads. The Babylonians and Assyrians had their own routes, but they perfected the idea of connecting them. Think of it as the first serious nationwide data plan. Except instead of Wi-Fi, you get horses and sandals. Historians still argue whether Cyrus the Great himself planned the Royal Road or whether it evolved later under Darius I, the so-called organizer of the empire. Either way, what began as a patchwork of local tracks became a single artery that pumped life into the Persian world. From the Aegean Sea to the Persian Gulf, traders, soldiers, priests, and envoys moved along it. But most importantly, so did information. The empire you're walking through is vast, stretching across 3 continents, home to dozens of languages and cultures. Managing it all required more than soldiers or taxes. It required communication. Darius understood this better than anyone. He built not only roads, but an entire system around them. Rest stations, fresh horses, and relay riders who could cover immense distances without rest. You might picture these couriers as the ancient equivalent of express delivery, except their tracking updates were carved in stone or whispered by breathless riders. As the sun climbs higher, the road dips between rolling hills. You pass a stone marker etched with wedge-shaped letters. It's an inscription that likely lists the distance to the next station. The Persians were nothing if not organized, and maybe just a little controlling. They loved recording things: tax lists, inventories, names of couriers, even who borrowed a particular horse. Somewhere in the archives of Persepolis, a clay tablet probably still notes that you're late to your next post. You pause to rest beneath an olive tree. In the distance, a small caravan approaches, a mix of donkeys, guards, and a single horseman wearing a crimson sash. That sash marks him as one of the king's messengers, part of the royal postal service. He doesn't stop to chat. His orders forbid it. Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor darkness of night, wrote Herodotus, prevents these couriers from completing their appointed course with all speed. If that sounds familiar, it's because the U.S. Postal Service later borrowed that line for its unofficial motto. The Persians, quite literally, delivered first. The messenger disappears in a swirl of dust, and you can't help but wonder what message he carries. A royal decree? A tax report? Maybe just a letter to someone's mother complaining about the price of camels. Historians still debate what percentage of the messages were purely administrative versus personal or diplomatic. But the fact remains, this road carried the empire's heartbeat. You start walking again, your sandals crunching over gravel smoothed by centuries of use. On either side, small villages dot the landscape, each one connected by the same lifeline of stone. Farmers wave as you pass. They've seen travelers like you countless times. Some even rely on these routes to send word to nearby markets, a farmer's version of checking messages. It's a reminder that even in antiquity, communication wasn't just for kings. As you cross a narrow wooden bridge, the gentle murmur of the stream below fills the silence. The Persians were masters of infrastructure, constructing bridges, culverts, and causeways to keep their roads reliable year-round. A few of these ancient foundations still exist today, visible in the ruins of Turkey and Iran. You might imagine that the sound of water you hear now is the same one a courier heard 2.5 millennia ago, when he stopped here for a drink before galloping onward. Somewhere ahead lies one of the royal way stations, known as Angarium. Each was about a day's ride apart, stocked with fresh horses, food, and shelter for official couriers. You'll reach one soon, but not yet. For now, you just walk, listening to the hum of cicadas and the creak of distant wagon wheels. It's strange, you think, an empire so vast, yet so carefully connected. Messages didn't just move across space, they carried power. A single sealed order could change a governor, move an army, or command a tribute of gold. There's a quiet awe in realizing how much depended on one small piece of parchment, one rider, one road. Of course, not every message arrived safely. Theft, storms, or human error could delay a dispatch for weeks. Sometimes the wax seal was broken early, maybe by an impatient official or a curious innkeeper. There are records of punishments for such acts, though historians still argue whether those were strictly enforced or mostly symbolic warnings. In an empire this size, control was as much about image as enforcement. The afternoon light begins to soften. You've been walking for hours now, but the horizon hasn't changed. The royal road plays tricks on your sense of distance. It's so straight that you can't quite tell how far you've come. Your feet ache, but in that pleasant rhythmic way that comes with long travel. You feel yourself sinking into the landscape, the hum of history beneath your steps, the whisper of wind that sounds almost like forgotten speech. You notice something odd beside the road, a stretch of scorched earth and stones arranged in a faint pattern. Could it be an old beacon site? Some scholars suggest that signal fires once supplemented the courier system, though others argue they were more symbolic than practical. Still, the idea is beautiful. Tiny dots of flame connecting mountains like constellations, a glowing language written across the night. As the sun dips below the horizon, you reach a low ridge. From here, the royal road stretches eastward, a line fading into twilight. Somewhere beyond those hills lies Susa, the imperial capital, where Darius waits for word of his governors, his armies, and his empire's heartbeat. And somewhere far behind, messages are already flowing west again, carrying news, tribute, and maybe a few complaints about saddle sores. You settle down beside the road, the air cooling, the stars emerging one by one. A caravan bell jingles softly in the dark. You think about how many millions of footsteps, hoofbeats, and whispers have passed along this same path, and how every one of them carried a fragment of human connection. Tomorrow, you'll follow one of those messages east, tracing it through relay stations, across mountains, and into the heart of the empire. But for now, You let the stillness take over, the kind of silence that hums just loud enough to quiet your thoughts. You wake to the faint clatter of hooves and the hiss of early morning wind brushing through reeds. The royal road is stirring again. Couriers move before dawn, when the air is cool and the light is soft enough to hide them from curious eyes. Somewhere ahead, in the city of Persepolis, a scribe is already dipping his reed pen into black ink, preparing to copy the words of a king. You follow that image in your mind, a dim hall of polished stone, the air heavy with the scent of beeswax and oil lamps. Rows of scribes sit cross-legged, each one carefully tracing lines on parchment, clay, or thin strips of leather. They are not writing letters of love or gossip. They are writing orders, precise, formal, and binding. The King of Kings does not send text messages. He sends commands that could redraw borders or empty treasuries. The man at the center of this world is Darius I, though some would whisper his name with a little tremor, not out of fear, but reverence. He rules an empire so vast that even he cannot see all its corners. That is why these messages matter. They are his voice carried across the wilderness, through valleys and deserts, spoken again and again by couriers who never dared to read them. You might say Darius was the first to master the art of the forwarded message. The process is ceremonial, almost sacred. A scribe finishes a decree, rolls it neatly, and ties it with fine thread. Then comes the wax, melted, fragrant, and royal purple. The king presses his signet ring into the soft surface, leaving the mark that makes the words official. Without that seal, the message is just ink on skin. With it, it becomes law. A servant places the sealed scroll into a leather tube, which will hang from a rider's belt. This isn't a casual job. The courier, known as an angaros, takes an oath of silence and loyalty. He is not allowed to open, discuss, or even look too long at the scrolls he carries. Breaking the seal would mean death. You imagine the weight of that silence, carrying words powerful enough to start wars, yet never knowing what they say. Historians still argue whether all royal couriers were Persian-born or if local recruits could serve in their ranks. Some inscriptions suggest that the riders came from various provinces, chosen for speed and endurance rather than ethnicity. Whatever their origin, their loyalty was absolute. You could call them ancient government employees, just with a slightly more intense HR policy. Outside Persepolis, you find the staging ground where these couriers assemble. Dozens of horses stand ready, their coats gleaming in the early sun. Each horse belongs to the state, fed and maintained at royal expense. The riders move with quiet purpose, adjusting their saddles, tightening belts, checking the tubes that hold the king's words. The noise of 100 hoofbeats fills the courtyard, not chaotic, but rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat echoing across stone. The royal dispatches vary. Some concern taxes, endless lists of grain, silver, and livestock owed to the crown. Others are military reports, requests for new roads, or diplomatic messages sent to faraway satraps. A few might be letters of mercy, pardons granted, punishments lifted. You watch a scribe hand over one particular scroll with 2 seals instead of 1. The extra mark, someone whispers, means it is a message not even the satrap may open alone. You raise an eyebrow. It's the kind of intrigue that would make a good mystery movie if the ending weren't already buried in the sands of Iran. The rider mounts, accepts the scroll with both hands, and gallops off through the city gates. His horse's hooves strike sparks from the cobblestones. For the next 100 miles, that message will be invisible, carried in speed, in dust, in the trust between king and courier. You start walking again, your feet matching the imagined rhythm of the galloping horse. Along the road, you pass a small group of travelers, merchants from Babylon, a priest from Susa, and a soldier escorting a mule. They step aside respectfully as another courier thunders past. Everyone knows the rule. When the king's messenger comes, you make way. His mission outranks all others. At the next relay station, you stop to rest. It's a simple outpost: mud brick walls, a stable, a water trough, and a few men sitting cross-legged in the shade. Inside, you can see shelves lined with scrolls and tablets waiting for transport. Some are stamped with local seals, others with the royal insignia. Each one is part of the Empire's bloodstream, pulsing outward in every direction. You sit beside a courier polishing his saddle strap. He nods politely, but his eyes stay on his work. You ask how many miles he rides each day, and he shrugs. As many as my horse allows. His tone is calm, almost detached. He's used to this life. Endless motion, little sleep, no questions. The message is all that matters, he says softly. We are only legs for the king's voice. There's something oddly poetic in that, though he doesn't seem to notice. You take a drink from a clay cup, the water cool and metallic. In the distance, a dust cloud rises, another rider approaching. You realize how constant the traffic is. At any hour, on any day, someone is carrying a message somewhere in the Empire. It's not hard to imagine a kind of synchronization, a grand invisible network connecting millions of people through motion alone. The Persians didn't have email servers, but they had something better: reliability. Of course, not everyone admired this efficiency. Greek observers often accused the Persians of being overly bureaucratic, obsessed with records and seals. Herodotus, never shy with his opinions, described the empire's administration as both impressive and suffocating. He wasn't entirely wrong. The same system that ensured control also stifled spontaneity. You can almost picture a satrap rolling his eyes when yet another sealed scroll arrived with detailed instructions on how to dig a new irrigation canal. Still, there's beauty in the precision of it all. The empire's vastness demanded order, and these messages, these silent carriers of the king's will, kept that order alive. Without them, the provinces would drift apart, governors would rule like small kings, and the empire would crumble. You think about one particular legend, a courier who rode from Susa to Sardis in less than 5 days, carrying news of a rebellion. When he arrived, his horse collapsed from exhaustion, but the message was delivered. Historians still debate whether this story is literal or exaggerated. Either way, the point remains. The empire's system depended on dedication that bordered on obsession. As the sun begins to set, you continue walking, the road stretching out like a pale scar across the landscape. You pass another milestone, its inscription half eroded. Maybe it once bore the name of Darius or Cyrus. Maybe it simply said, "You're almost there," which would have been comforting after 400 kilometers. The air cools, and the smell of smoke drifts from a nearby campfire. You picture the couriers bedding down in silence, their horses tethered, their messages tucked safely beneath their cloaks. They don't speak of what they carry, but they all know the weight of it. A single wax seal can change lives or end them. You settle beside your own small fire, watching sparks rise into the night. The stars seem sharper here, as though the sky itself has been polished. Somewhere far away, another message is being sealed. Another rider is preparing to depart. The empire never truly sleeps. Even in darkness, its words move, unseen, unstoppable. As you drift toward drowsiness, you imagine those couriers again, countless silhouettes cutting across the desert, each one a moving fragment of the king's silent will. You realize that in a world before electricity, before telegraphs, before even paper envelopes, the Persians managed to build something astonishing. Not just a road, but a pulse that never stopped beating. Tomorrow, you'll follow that pulse further east, toward the dust and thunder of the relay stations, where speed and endurance blur together. For now, you rest beside the quiet hum of the Empire's voice, carried softly through the night. Morning breaks slow and honey-colored over the plain. You rise to the sound of horses, their steady breathing, the jingle of harness rings, the soft thump of hooves tamping down the earth. The royal road is awake again. You brush the dust from your cloak and start walking eastward, following the faint haze of dawn and the rhythmic clatter that grows louder with every mile. Before long, you reach one of the Empire's famed Pyridazes, the relay stations that made long-distance communication possible. It sits beside the road like a small fortress, walls thick enough to keep out bandits and wind alike. A stable fills most of the compound, its air heavy with the smell of sweat, hay, and horse oil. Outside, a few riders stretch their legs, cracking joints stiff from yesterday's miles. Inside the stable, horses stand ready, sleek, muscular creatures bred for speed and endurance. Each one is trained to sprint full tilt for no more than 20 or 30 miles before resting or switching places with a fresh mount. The Persians understood something that took other empires centuries to perfect: the art of logistics. A courier bursts through the gate in a cloud of dust, his cloak streaked with sweat. He doesn't slow down until the stablemaster waves him in. There's no shouting, no ceremony. The rider swings down, hands off his leather message tube, and immediately another man mounts a fresh horse, taking the same tube without a word. Within minutes, the second courier is gone, vanishing into the glare of morning. The first one collapses on a bench, gulping down a jug of cool water. You blink, amazed at the precision of it. There's something almost modern about this system, like a relay race or a relay server. Each rider knows only his leg of the journey. No one lingers, no one asks questions. The result? A message can travel hundreds of miles faster than a single man could ever ride alone. Historians still argue whether the stations were built exactly one day's ride apart or varied with terrain. Some say the Persians measured distance in horse lengths of exhaustion, meaning however far a good horse could gallop before needing rest. Whatever the metric, the network worked. Herodotus claimed couriers could cover the entire royal road, nearly 1,700 miles, in about 7 days. Modern estimates suggest maybe 9 or 10, but that's still astonishing. A letter today might envy such consistency. You wander among the horses, their hides shimmering with sweat. A stable hand hands you a handful of barley to feed them. The animal's breath is warm against your palm, its eyes calm but sharp. These horses were as vital as any soldier in the Persian army. Without them, no decree could reach its destination, no tax could be collected, no rebellion reported in time to stop it. At the far end of the compound, a young courier repairs his saddle strap. He looks barely older than 20, his face tanned to bronze. You sit beside him and ask if he enjoys the job. He smiles, a little crookedly. Enjoy? Sometimes. But mostly, you just learn not to feel anything. You ride, you deliver, you rest, and then you ride again. He shrugs. It's better than farming. You laugh softly, though part of you wonders if it really is. Riding the same road for years, sleeping under stars, never knowing what you carry, it's a strange kind of devotion. The courier seems to sense your thought. The king trusts us, he says simply. That's worth something. He tells you a story, half legend, half warning. Once, he says, a courier fell asleep at a station and delayed a royal message by 2 hours. The next morning, he was replaced permanently. You don't ask what that means. You already know. The Persians valued speed the way some modern people value honesty. more in principle than in practice, but dangerous to violate. After a meal of dates and bread, you continue your journey, walking beside a stretch of road worn smooth by centuries of hooves. The ground trembles faintly as a team of riders approaches, 3 of them side by side, each carrying identical tubes. You step aside as they pass, a blur of motion and wind. Red sashes whip behind them like flames. The dust they kick up tastes of salt and sun. It's strange how something so ancient can feel so efficient. You begin to imagine the royal road as a living creature, its horses like blood cells, carrying oxygen in the form of ink and parchment. The empire itself is the body, vast and silent, but alive because messages keep moving through its veins. As you walk, the terrain shifts. The land flattens into a long, open stretch of desert. The sun burns hotter now, shimmering on the horizon. You can almost hear the sound of hooves echoing off the sand, each beat blending into the next until it becomes hypnotic. It's easy to understand why ancient travelers often describe the road as endless. To the left, a group of workers repairs a broken milestone. They're using stones hauled from a nearby quarry, fitting them together with careful precision. One of them pauses to wave, his face half covered with cloth. You wave back. These men, though forgotten in the grand histories, are the reason the couriers could ride at all. Maintenance was as important as speed. A cracked bridge or washed-out section could delay royal orders for weeks, a small flaw that might topple a province. You recall reading somewhere that the Persians even kept spare horses tethered along certain stretches, ready for emergencies. A few Greek travelers mocked the system as extravagant. "Who needs that many horses?" they sneered. But then again, those same Greeks later borrowed the idea for their own empires. Hypocrisy travels just as fast as messages, apparently. Around midday, you reach another outpost. This one is livelier. Merchants restocking supplies, soldiers escorting caravans, and a small band of musicians plucking strings in the shade. The sound drifts lazily through the air. You sit down beside a jug of cool water and watch as another courier gallops in. The crowd parts without being told. There's a kind of reverence in the way everyone clears a path. The rider dismounts, hands off his scroll, and collapses into a pile of straw. His horse is immediately led away, watered, brushed, and replaced. A fresh rider mounts, checks the seal, and vanishes down the road before the dust from the last hoofbeats even settles. The efficiency is almost eerie, as if time itself bends for the Empire's messages. You find yourself wondering, how did they coordinate it all? Who kept track of which horse, which rider, which message? Some scholars believe there was a central office, perhaps in Susa, maintaining clay records of every dispatch. Others argue that local satraps managed their own systems. The truth is still debated, but what's clear is that nothing like it existed before. The Persians had invented bureaucracy with legs. As the afternoon light softens, a rider approaches from the opposite direction, westbound. He carries a return message, smaller than most, tied with green thread instead of red. A guard explains that color indicated priority: red for royal orders, green for reports, black for military dispatches. You nod, thinking how even a simple thread could symbolize the empire's structure, color-coded hierarchy centuries before spreadsheets were invented. The sun dips lower, painting the road gold. You walk a while longer, passing scattered way stations and the occasional shrine to Mithra, god of contracts and promises. It makes sense that the Persians worshipped a deity tied to truth and obligation. Every sealed scroll on this road is, in a way, a sacred promise. You stop for the night near a ruined bridge. The stones are warm beneath your hands, still holding the day's heat. In the distance, you can just make out the faint thunder of hooves. Another courier, maybe, or just an echo carried by memory. You lie back and let the sound fade into the darkness. Somewhere out there, messages are still moving. Orders, reports, love letters that never mention love. The dust they raise will settle, the hoofprints will vanish, but the road remains, patient, unbroken, whispering beneath the stars. Tomorrow, you'll meet the men who translate these words, the scribes who turn royal Persian into the many tongues of empire. But for now, you close your eyes and listen to the rhythm of hooves in the dust, steady, endless, like the heartbeat of history itself. By the time the next morning rolls in, the dust has settled, and the air feels heavy with heat and purpose. You walk east again, the royal road glimmering faintly in the low sun, and soon the sound of human voices replaces the endless rhythm of hooves. Ahead lies a bustling administrative outpost, not a way station for horses this time, but for words. You can hear them before you see them, a chorus of pens scratching, voices murmuring in different dialects, the occasional sharp crack of a scribe snapping a reed quill in frustration. As you draw closer, you see an open courtyard filled with tables and scrolls, shaded by a woven awning. Dozens of men sit hunched over parchment and clay tablets, each surrounded by piles of documents. Welcome to the Empire's linguistic crossroads, where the king's words learn to speak in 100 tongues. Here, the couriers deliver not just messages, but meaning. A sealed decree from Persepolis arrives written in Old Persian, the king's own language. But the satrap who receives it might speak Aramaic or Elamite. His clerks may prefer Akkadian or Greek. And the villagers down the road? They might understand none of the above. The scribes bridge that gap. They are translators, interpreters, and bureaucrats rolled into one. Each message is copied multiple times, transcribed into the languages of the provinces it will pass through. You watch one man reading aloud in Persian while another writes in Aramaic, his lips moving silently, his eyes flicking back and forth. There's no magic here, only practice and precision. Historians still argue whether Aramaic truly functioned as the empire's official language or simply the most practical one. Whatever the case, it was everywhere, scratched into clay, inked onto parchment, even carved into stone along major roads. It was the connective tissue of a multilingual empire. You might call it the ancient world's version of English as a global language, minus the coffee shops and Wi-Fi. You approach a table where an older scribe sits, his beard streaked with gray, his hands stained black from ink. He gestures for you to sit, clearly amused by your curiosity. On his desk lies a half-finished translation, a royal edict concerning tax exemptions for temple lands in Babylon. This part, he says, pointing to a line of Aramaic, is tricky. The Persian word for gift can also mean tribute, depending on tone. Choose wrong, and someone's either blessed or bankrupt. You can't help but laugh. Bureaucratic chaos, it seems, is eternal. He dips his pen again and adds, "Sometimes the king's words arrive too poetic. The scribes in Persepolis like their metaphors. The favor of Ahura Mazda shall flow like a river." He rolls his eyes. Try translating that into Babylonian legal code. Rivers flood. There's a quiet rhythm to the work here, a kind of symphony of small movements. One man rubs his temples, muttering purses in Greek. Another sings softly to himself as he copies line after line in Elamite. Somewhere behind you, someone sneezes, and a half-dozen scribes murmur blessings in 6 different languages. A runner arrives carrying a message from the west, another sealed scroll. The chief translator breaks the wax, unrolls it carefully, and reads in a low voice. Then, with practiced calm, he begins dictating. His assistants repeat the words in turn, their voices overlapping. Persian, Aramaic, Greek, Egyptian. It sounds like a chant, a living translation rippling outward through the air. You realize how remarkable this is. The empire doesn't just tolerate diversity, it depends on it. Without translators, the royal road would carry nothing but silence. The couriers may move the king's words, but the scribes give them life. As you watch, a younger translator waves you over. He's been struggling with a letter from a provincial governor, written in a mix of Persian and something that looks suspiciously like local slang. "We call this bad Aramaic," he says with a grin. "Half the time we have to guess." He holds up the letter and adds, "This line here, I think he's trying to say the grain shipment is delayed because of locusts, but it might be goats, hard to tell. Both eat everything." You stifle a laugh. Empires rise and fall, but miscommunication stays eternal. Outside the main hall, a smaller room holds the empire's record tablets, clay archives that preserve thousands of messages long after their urgency has faded. The walls are lined with shelves, each one heavy with neat rows of rectangular tablets pressed with cuneiform. Some still bear the fingerprints of their makers. You trace the edge of one and feel the tiny grooves under your fingers. You are touching the literal texture of history. The archivist, a woman with sharp eyes and calm movements, explains that these messages aren't just copies. They're the memory of the empire. When a courier delivers a message, she says, we keep a copy here. That way, no one can claim they never received it. She smiles faintly. You'd be surprised how many satraps lose inconvenient orders. She shows you a tablet dated to the reign of Xerxes, Darius's son. It records the shipment of cedar wood from Phoenicia for palace construction. Still intact after 2,000 years, she says, but the palace burned down. You both share a quiet laugh at the irony. The afternoon grows warmer. The scent of wax, parchment, and ink thickens in the air. You wander to the outer courtyard, where several messengers rest in the shade, waiting for the scribes to finish their work. One plucks a stringed instrument softly. Another sharpens his knife. The mood is calm but purposeful. Everyone here knows they are part of something larger than themselves. You can almost feel the hum of the system, the constant circulation of meaning. The king's commands start in Persian, become Aramaic for clarity, Greek for diplomacy, Elamite for ceremony. Each translation changes the texture slightly, like light refracted through glass. No one version is truly original. Every copy is both faithful and flawed. Historians still debate whether this constant translation diluted the king's authority or strengthened it. Did meaning get lost, or did it evolve, adapting to local understanding? There's no easy answer. But looking around at this buzzing courtyard of multilingual scribes, you sense that the empire's real strength wasn't uniformity, it was flexibility. The Persians knew that to rule the world, you first had to speak it. A shout interrupts your thoughts. A courier has returned, exhausted and half collapsed. His horse limps, its flanks streaked with salt from dried sweat. The stable hands rush forward, taking the scroll from his belt. "It's urgent," he gasps. Within moments, the message is in the translator's hands. The chain never breaks. You sit quietly and watch as the process unfold yet again. Seal broken, ink prepared, words reshaped. Somewhere in Susa, a king wrote a thought. Here, in this outpost, that thought becomes a chorus of languages. And within a few hours, it will be galloping east again, carried by another rider through another stretch of wilderness. As dusk settles, the scribes extinguish their lamps one by one. The courtyard falls silent except for the faint rustle of parchment and the whisper of the wind. You imagine the thousands of messages still in motion across the empire, each one alive in its own language, each one carrying a fragment of human intent. You stretch your legs, ready to move on. Tomorrow, you'll follow not the scribes, but the signals, the fires and drums that carry messages even faster than riders. But for now, you linger a moment longer, watching the last scribe pack away his inkstone. The air smells of oil and dust, and for just a second, the whole place feels like a library of whispers, fragile, flickering, and eternal. The next leg of your journey takes you north, following the royal road as it snakes across the dry plateau. The sun is merciless, the sky the color of brass, and the dust from passing hooves clings to your throat like smoke. You've left behind the quiet hum of the scribe's outpost, trading ink and parchment for wind and flame. Because today, you're chasing a different kind of message, one that travels without riders or words. By noon, you reach a low ridge overlooking a valley. A squat tower rises on the opposite hill, its stone base blackened by centuries of heat. The smell of burnt oil lingers faintly even now. You recognize it instantly, a fire signal station. In the old Persian system, the one that bound the empire tighter than any army, these towers stood like sentinels across the land. From Sardis to Susa, from the mountains of Armenia to the shores of the Persian Gulf, a chain of light once linked the empire together. You find the watchmen still at their posts. They live simple lives, half soldiers, half astronomers. One man tends a small brazier, coaxing the embers with a steady hand. Another scans the horizon with a polished bronze mirror, checking for the telltale flicker of light from the next station east. They move with the unhurried precision of people who know that timing, not speed, defines their work. The captain of the post greets you warmly. His skin is tanned deep from years under the sun, and his eyes are sharp, almost hawk-like. He explains the system. Each tower is placed within clear line of sight of the next, usually 30 or 40 kilometers apart, depending on terrain. At night, they use fire. By day, polished metal or smoke. A single message can pass from the Aegean coast to the royal capital in less than a day. Astonishing speed in an age when most people still measure distance in days of walking. He gestures toward a series of clay jars lined neatly near the wall. Oil for night signals, he says. We keep it covered to protect from wind. A steady flame means one thing. 2 quick flashes mean another. Every pattern tells a story. You ask what kind of messages they send, and his expression hardens slightly. Only those from the king or his generals, he replies. We don't gossip with fire. Still, his tone softens as he adds, but we know when the empire trembles. We see the sky light up all the way to the horizon. He tells you of the night when Xerxes' invasion fleet was wrecked by storms, how the line of towers flared like a heartbeat across Asia Minor, or the day a rebellion in Egypt was crushed and the signal of triumph flashed eastward, city by city, until it reached Persepolis by sunset. Each tower, he says, carries both the weight of victory and the echo of fear. The fire signal system wasn't unique to Persia. The Greeks, Chinese, and Romans all had their versions, but the Persians perfected it. They understood the principle of visibility, elevation, and rhythm. Some historians believe they even used colored smoke or patterned shields to encode more complex messages. Whatever the method, it turned the empire into something almost modern, a place where information outran armies. As evening approaches, you climb to the top of the tower with the captain. The view stretches endlessly, hills folding into one another, the royal road glinting faintly in the distance. To the west, another tower perches on a hilltop like a watchful bird. The captain points. "That's the Sardis line," he says. "When they light their fire, we answer." He kneels by the brazier and sprinkles a pinch of dried resin into the coals. The smoke rises in a thin, fragrant column. "Watch," he says. A flicker of light flashes from the western tower, once, twice. The captain nods and responds, adjusting the mirror in his hand. Within seconds, the signal bounces onward to the east. The message is simple, a routine status check, perhaps, but the speed still feels magical. A conversation stretched across mountains, carried by nothing but reflection. You can almost imagine the invisible threads connecting them, light leaping from hill to hill, weaving the empire together in a silent web. For all its size and complexity, this system rests on one fragile condition: clear skies. A single sandstorm, a sudden fog, and the whole network goes dark. The captain shrugs when you mention this. "That's why we have couriers," he says. "Light for speed, riders for certainty." You share a simple meal with the watchman: flatbread, cheese, and dates. As the sun dips below the horizon, the air cools and the tower comes alive. Men move with practiced coordination, feeding oil into the main brazier. Soon, a great flame roars to life, painting their faces gold. The night stretches wide and empty around you, except for that bright pillar of light. And then, on the far ridge, another tower answers. For a long while, you say nothing. The chain continues east, each flame calling to the next. In a world without electricity, this is how the empire breathes, a rhythm of fire and silence. Somewhere, hundreds of kilometers away, a king might be standing on his palace roof, watching the same sequence unfold, knowing his will travels at the speed of light. You think of the couriers you've met, galloping tirelessly along the royal road, and realize how perfectly the two systems complement each other. The fires send the news ahead, warnings, victories, alerts, while the couriers follow with detail and confirmation. Together, they form an ancient version of what we might now call real-time communication. As the flames crackle, the captain speaks softly. "Sometimes I wonder if the king truly knows what he commands," he says. "Messages change as they travel. Even light can lie." He gestures at the distant horizon. If a tower delays a moment or a man hesitates, the pattern shifts. What begins as victory might end as defeat. He chuckles wryly. Empires have burned for less. You stay until midnight, watching the stars drift above the signal fires. The captain tells you they often use the constellations to align their mirrors by day and to calibrate their direction by night. "We read the sky like a map," he says. "It never lies, unless the clouds intervene." As the hours pass, the conversation drifts toward philosophy. The watchmen speak of the paradox of their duty, to be both vital and invisible. "No one remembers the towers when the empire is strong," one says, "but when the fires fail, everyone notices." You think of this long chain of towers, stretching for thousands of kilometers, each one manned by unseen guardians who trade sleep for vigilance. They are, in a way, the nervous system of civilization. Each flame, each reflection, a pulse in the body of empire. Near dawn, as the last fire burns low, the captain extinguishes the brazier with sand. The smoke rises in a lazy curl, fading into the pale sky. The empire sleeps again. Before you depart, he gives you a small shard of blackened stone, a piece of the tower's old brazier cracked by centuries of heat. "A token," he says, "to remember the light that spoke without words." You tuck it away carefully and make your descent down the rocky slope. The morning light glows faintly on the horizon. the same direction the fires had danced hours ago. You realize that what you've witnessed is more than a feat of logistics. It's a symbol of faith. The Persians believed that a single light could command the world. As you continue along the royal road, you pass other stations, some crumbled to rubble, others still standing proud. Each tells the same silent story, an empire's heartbeat, flickering and eternal, carried not on parchment or hoofbeats, but through fire and sky. By the time the sun is fully up, you look back once more. The tower is a black silhouette against the light, ancient, steadfast, and patient. Somewhere beyond it, unseen yet enduring, other towers wait, their ashes sleeping beneath centuries of dust. You can almost imagine them still whispering across the hills, repeating the messages of kings long gone. And for a brief moment, the road itself seems to hum, alive with memory, alive with flame. By now, the dust of the royal road has worked its way into everything you own. Your sandals, your satchel, probably even your lungs. You've followed riders and fires, but tonight the trail leads you indoors, into a quieter kind of magic, the place where words become immortal. The riders might vanish, the towers might crumble, but the messages themselves, the real lifeblood of the empire, live on in clay, ink, and animal skin. You find yourself in a small workshop near Susa, a dim, cool chamber lined with shelves that sag under the weight of thousands of tablets. The air smells faintly of baked earth and lamp oil, with a touch of something sweet, perhaps the glue used to seal scrolls. A scribe looks up from his table and smiles without surprise, as if he's been expecting you. "Sit," he says, gesturing to a stool. "You've seen the fires on the riders. Now see the reason they move at all." On the table before him rests a slab of damp clay, roughly the size of a man's hand. With a sharpened reed stylus, he presses tiny wedge-shaped marks in neat rows. The sound is soft, a gentle tapping, like rain on packed earth. Each stroke feels deliberate, reverent. This, he explains, is how messages began, long before parchment, long before ink. The Persians inherited it from the Babylonians, who learned it from the Sumerians. A good idea never truly dies, only gets baked a little harder. He chuckles softly, his humor dry as the desert outside. You watch as he presses another line of cuneiform. The symbols look alien, like bird tracks crossing sand. This one, he says, is a record of grain taxes from the province of Media. Not thrilling reading, unless you're a satrap trying to balance an empire's pantry. The tablet, he tells you, will dry for several hours, then be fired in a small kiln until it's as hard as brick. Once fired, it can last forever, or close enough. Fire destroys parchment, but it preserves clay. He points to a stack of older tablets on the shelf, their edges chipped, but their markings perfectly intact after centuries. These are older than your grandfather's grandfather's grandfathers, and still legible. You pick one up carefully. The clay is surprisingly heavy, cool against your palm. The tiny impressions seem to shimmer in the lamplight, like a language of shadows. You can't read it, of course, but it feels sacred, like holding the heartbeat of history. The scribe sets down his stylus and opens a small chest. Inside are scrolls rolled tight and bound with red cord. Now these, he says, are for messages that must travel. He unties one and lets it unfurl, thin parchment, pale and smooth. The text flows in Aramaic, the lingua franca of the empire. Clay stays put, he explains. Parchment moves. The king's words ride on this. You trace the ink with your eyes. The letters are clear and rhythmic, almost musical. The writing tool, a reed pen dipped in black ink made from soot and gum, gives each stroke a whispery texture. If it rains, the scribe says, we pray. Ink and weather have never friends. He leads you to the back room, where assistants work by lamplight. One prepares sheets of parchment by scraping the last traces of hair from animal skin, stretching it tight over a frame. Another grinds pigment in a small bowl, turning soot into ink. A third seals a finished scroll with wax, pressing a signet ring into it with care. Every step feels ritualistic, deliberate. The making of a message is a ceremony. You realize this is the unseen foundation of the empire's power, not soldiers or gold, but the ability to make words endure. The scribe tells you something curious. Some important messages are written twice, once on parchment for delivery and once on clay for the archives. That way, he says, if the messenger is eaten by wolves or bandits or the occasional sandstorm, the king still has a copy. He grins. History hates blank spaces. He shows you another kind of tablet, smaller and thinner. Sealed tablets, he says. The message is written inside, then covered by another layer of clay. Only the recipient may break it open. Think of it as the world's first envelope. You ask if anyone ever cheated, tampered with the clay, or read what wasn't theirs. His eyes narrow mischievously. Of course, people are people. Historians still argue whether a certain sealed message to the satrap of Lydia was ever truly opened by him or by his secretary first. The clay never tattled. You smile. The humor helps, because it's hard not to feel small here. Every wall around you is covered in messages, taxes, treaties, love letters, decrees. 1,000 voices whispering across time, trapped in solid earth. The scribe pauses, noticing your awe. You think writing is quiet, he says softly, but it's the loudest thing we do. Words outlast breath. You stay with him for hours, helping where you can, fetching water, trimming parchment, stirring the ink. He explains the art of spacing, the rhythm of script, the importance of margins. A message must breathe, he says. Crowded words make crowded minds. At one point, he opens a drawer and shows you something extraordinary. A tablet with a faint impression of a child's handprint frozen in the clay. My son, he says quietly. He pressed his hand here when he was small. The tablet broke later, but I kept the piece. He smiles, but there's something wistful in it. I suppose that's a kind of message, too. Later, when night falls, you step outside into the courtyard. The stars overhead look like scattered cuneiform, bright, sharp marks across a black sky. You realize that every spark of light is a message of its own, traveling through time and distance, just like these ancient records. The scribe joins you, carrying a tablet still warm from the kiln. He sets it on a stone ledge to cool, and the surface steams slightly in the chill air. When I was young, he says, I thought fire only destroyed. Now I know it can preserve. The clay becomes stronger after the flame. You look at the glowing kiln behind him and think about the paradox of it all. How something so fragile can survive for millennia if treated just right. How a simple wedge pressed into clay can still speak across ages when even empires fade to dust. He sighs and looks toward the east, where dawn is beginning to gray the horizon. Someday, he murmurs, someone will find these. They won't know my name or yours or the king's, but they'll know we cared enough to write. It's a comforting thought, a message across eternity, not sealed with wax, but with intent. You thank him, and he waves it off with a smile. Go, he says. The road is long, and words are waiting. You shoulder your bag again, feeling its weight, heavier now, but also somehow lighter. Inside it, you've tucked a small, unfired clay tablet the scribe gave you as a souvenir. "Write your own story someday," he said. You walk back toward the royal road as the first light spills over the city. The smell of baked clay lingers on your hands, and you can almost feel the echoes of 1,000 stylus strokes, like the heartbeat of history itself. Somewhere behind you, the scribe's kiln roars to life again, another message being born in fire. And you can't help but wonder, in the far future, when the empire is gone and even the roads are dust, whose hands will hold that tablet next? By now, you know that every word in the Persian Empire, every royal whisper and urgent decree depends on the men who ride. You followed them from the soft glow of the scribes' workshops to the endless ribbon of the royal road. But tonight, you stop to meet the ones who make the impossible possible. The couriers themselves, the living arteries of an empire that never sleeps. The relay post sits at a lonely stretch between Susa and Ecbatana, half buried in sand and time. Its stone walls are thick, its roof low, built to keep out both heat and thieves. The sound of stamping hooves fills the night as riders change shifts. Sparks leap from a forge where a stable hand repairs a loose horseshoe. You can smell the sweat, the leather, and that distinct tang of dust and animal hair that never leaves a courier's life. A man in a faded blue tunic greets you with a nod. His name is Artavazd, though everyone calls him Wind. You can see why. His stance is coiled energy, his eyes sharp as if still measuring the horizon even while standing still. He waves you over to a low table near the fire pit. "You're the one following the messages," he says, half amused. "You've seen our roads and towers, but have you ridden them?" You shake your head, and he laughs. "Then you don't yet understand what it means to move for the king." He gestures to the others, 6 riders, all wiry, weathered, and alert despite the late hour. They sit in a loose circle, eating dates and flatbread, boots dusty from the road. Every one of them wears the same short cloak, marked with the royal emblem of a winged sun. "We're the Angarium," Artavaz says proudly, "the royal couriers. We carry the breath of the empire." He explains their creed. "Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor darkness of night shall stay these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed course." You blink because yes, that exact line, or something very close, will later find its way into the motto of a much later postal service. But these men said it first, long before marble cities or printed stamps. Artavazd pours you a drink, warm, slightly sour goat's milk, and begins telling the truth behind the myth. Each courier rides roughly 25 to 30 kilometers between relay stations where a fresh horse and meal wait. No man rides the whole road alone. Instead, messages fly from hand to hand, hoofbeat to hoofbeat. The horses carry the burden, he says, but the riders carry the promise. He shows you a small leather pouch sealed with wax. Inside, orders for a satrap in Bactria. "If this seal breaks, I die." Simple as that. His tone is casual, but you can tell he means it. "We don't open, we don't question, we deliver." You ask him what happens if someone fails, if a message doesn't make it through. His face grows still. "Then the road remembers," he says quietly, "and the road punishes." One of the younger couriers, a man barely 20, laughs nervously. "He means the commander takes your horse and your hide." The others chuckle grimly. We've all seen it happen. Still, there's pride in their eyes. They know they are the invisible spine of empire, trusted more than generals, feared more than spies. Without them, Persia would crumble into silence. As the night deepens, the riders begin to share their stories, part boasting, part confession. One claims he once outran a sandstorm by swapping horses mid-gallop. Another tells of a message carried through blizzard and wolf territory in the Zagros Mountains. A third swears he once rode for 3 days without sleep, guided only by the stars and the faint glow of watchfires along the road. You can't help but smile. Historians still argue whether anyone could really ride that far without rest, you say lightly. Artavaz just grins. Historians argue because they weren't there. He tosses a date pit into the fire. Let me tell you something. The king might own the empire, but we make it move. Every rider knows that. When I'm out there, wind in my face, the road alive under me, I don't feel small. I feel necessary. You follow him to the stables. Rows of horses stand quietly in the dim light, tails flicking lazily. Each stall has a bucket of grain and a small bronze tag with the horse's name and distance record. Artavaz pats one on the flank. This one, Darius, carried a dispatch during the revolt of Babylon, fastest in the line, never stumbled once. His voice softens. They retired him with honors. Not many animals get that. He shows you how they saddle in seconds, how each pouch is inspected before departure, how they wear their daggers not for war, but for cutting rope, cloth, or bandits' hands. We don't fight, he says. We evade. The road is our battlefield. You notice something on the wall, an inscription burned into the beam above the door. It's written in Old Persian, but Artavaz translates, "To ride is to trust the road more than yourself." It's clear these men live by ritual. Before each ride, they touch the seal on their pouch, whisper a short prayer to Mithra, god of contracts and truth, and mount without looking back. Superstition, you ask? Artavaz rugs. Maybe, but it keeps us honest and alive. He invites you to stay the night. You lie on a thin mat by the fire, half dozing as the riders prepare for the dawn relay. The air is filled with quiet efficiency. The clink of buckles, the scrape of boots, the soft snort of horses. Someone hums a low tune, almost a lullaby, the kind meant to calm both beast and man before a long road. Just before sunrise, Artavaz saddles up. The sky is streaked with pale pink, and the desert hums with awakening life. He turns to you and says, "Watch carefully." He rides out, pouch tight against his chest. Within seconds, the rhythm of hoofbeats swells and fades, the sound swallowed by wind and distance. An hour later, another rider appears from the opposite direction, bearing a fresh pouch. They exchange greetings, swap horses, and the cycle continues. You realize you're watching a living chain, each link perfect, each motion rehearsed across generations. The station commander, a woman with sharp eyes and a scar across her jaw, tells you something few outsiders hear. Once, she says, we carried more than orders. We carried secrets, coded messages written in 2 hands, one for the king, one for the gods. Some say we even carried love letters between satraps' wives and poets. She smirks. The road hears everything. She shows you an old wax seal, cracked and blackened. This one, she says softly, was on the last message from a courier who never returned. They say he disappeared in the mountains during the reign of Xerxes. Storm came and he was gone, but the message arrived anyway, found by shepherds days later, still sealed. The others nod solemnly. You can see in their eyes that they believe the road itself protects what's meant to be delivered. Maybe it's faith, maybe it's just respect for the craft, but it feels real. You spend another day with them, riding a short stretch of the road. The horse's gait rocks you into a trance. The world blurs into motion, the shimmer of heat, the crunch of gravel, the thrum of speed. You feel, for a moment, what Artavaz meant, necessary. When you part ways, he presses the edge of his signet ring into your palm. "For luck," he says, and so you remember that words are faster than swords. You watch him disappear into the horizon, dust curling behind him like smoke. The sound of hooves fades, but the echo lingers, steady, rhythmic, eternal. And as you walk on, you realize the Empire's voice is not a roar or a proclamation. It's this, the quiet thunder of hooves carrying messages across a world that refuses to stand still. You wake before dawn, the kind of pale light that looks like it's been washed too many times stretching over the horizon. The air smells faintly of dust and dew. Somewhere in the east, the mountains of Media catch the first sun, their peaks glowing like embers. Today, your task is not glamorous. You're one of the many who keep the royal courier stations alive along the royal road. You don't gallop into cities with grand messages sealed by the king's ring. You clean, feed, wait, and maintain the flow that makes those gallops possible. You push open the wooden door of the way station, the hinges whining a little. The smell inside is all hay, horse sweat, and last night's ashes. One of your co-workers, Darius, not that Darius, thankfully, is still half asleep beside the stable wall. You toss him a lazy morning and start to feed the horses, those sleek, restless creatures that have carried more royal words than any scribe ever has. Their nostrils flare as they eat. Their tails flick impatiently at flies. Outside, a narrow stretch of the royal road unrolls westward like a dusty ribbon. It looks simple, but this road is one of the Empire's greatest achievements. Paved, maintained, and measured with almost obsessive precision. Historians still argue whether it was an original Persian innovation or a refined version of earlier Assyrian routes. Either way, it worked. It connected Sardis to Susa, nearly 1,700 miles of message-carrying efficiency. You step into the courtyard and stretch your back. A courier is due soon, maybe from Susa. You can almost feel the tension in the air before a rider arrives, the faint anticipation of motion. Every sound sharpens, a distant hoofbeat, the rattle of a cartwheel, a crow's lazy call. Then, like a mirage, you spot him, a lone rider cresting the hill, horse and cloak dusted the same golden color. He's been riding since before midnight, you guess. By the time he reaches your post, the horse's flanks are trembling, and its breath is loud enough to drown out your greeting. The courier doesn't even dismount fully, just slides off the saddle, presses a small sealed tablet into your palm, and mutters, "From Babylon." His words are dry, cracked. You nod, hand him a cup of watered wine, and another stable hand rushes forward with a fresh horse. The exchange takes less than a minute. That's how it always is. No delays, no chatting about the weather. The horse is replaced, the courier takes a new one, and he's gone before you even have time to blink. This relay system, known as the Angarium, is as relentless as time itself. Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor darkness of night prevents these couriers from completing their appointed course with all speed, a Greek historian once marveled, though you suspect he was exaggerating a little. Snow would definitely slow them down. You sit down with the tablet after the courier's dust has settled. You're not supposed to read it, of course, but you can't help glancing at the cuneiform impressions, tiny, wedge-shaped whispers pressed into clay. It's probably something dull, you think. Most messages are. Reports on taxes, grain counts, troop placements, repairs. Every now and then you hear rumors of love letters smuggled through the system, or coded warnings written so cleverly that even the messengers don't realize what they carry. Historians still argue whether such romantic stories ever really happened, or if they're just nostalgic embroidery added by later writers who wanted the postal system to sound more poetic. A faint wind blows through the courtyard, carrying the smell of the horse feed. You take a deep breath and look toward the hills. The next station is 30 miles away. That means the courier you just saw will probably reach it by dusk. You admire that kind of endurance. The horses, the riders, the systems. It's almost mathematical the way the empire is carved into predictable distances. There's a certain peace to the monotony of it all. You sweep the floor, refill the troughs, check the spare saddles. Darius finally wakes up, muttering something about a dream where he outran the king's courier and became famous. You laugh softly, tell him that's the kind of dream that ends with being reassigned to dig ditches in the desert. Still, he says with a smirk, at least I'd get some sun. As the day warms, merchants pass the station, caravans bound for Sardis, guards trudging behind mules. You overhear snatches of conversation, complaints about tariffs, gossip about new satrap appointments, debates over whether the king's beard oil has changed formula. Even in these trivial exchanges, you can feel the slow pulse of the empire. Information, rumors, stories, all moving in parallel streams along this road. You pause for a moment and imagine the bigger picture. Thousands of people across this enormous land. Scribes in Babylon scratching clay tablets, soldiers guarding desert roads, traders swapping gossip in caravanserai. And connecting them all, this network of couriers and stations, this almost invisible circulatory system of ink and hoofbeats. You realize how strange it is that you, standing here brushing dust off a horse, are part of something vast enough to shape history. By midday, the road shimmers with heat. You retreat inside, pour yourself some water, and try not to think about how much you miss trees. Shade is rare out here. As you sit in the doorway, you remember the last time you saw a royal messenger collapse from exhaustion. It was a few summers ago. He'd pushed his horse too far, ignoring every rule, trying to shave an hour off his time. You'd found him slumped by the trough, lips cracked, eyes open but seeing nothing. Afterward, the station chief wrote a report that vanished into the system like a pebble dropped into a lake. No one ever found out what his message was. You sigh. Maybe that's the strange beauty of this work. You carry things you'll never understand. You move words that shape kings and kingdoms, but you never see the ripples they make. Somewhere, perhaps, one of these clay tablets decides the fate of a province, the rise of a satrap, the fall of a noble. You just hand it off and wait for the next one. A few children from a nearby village wander by later in the afternoon. They stare at the horses, wide-eyed. One of them asks if the animals ever talk. You chuckle and say, "Only when they're hungry." They diggle, then run off, their laughter fading into the hum of the day. As sunset creeps across the land, you light the oil lamps. Another courier will arrive soon, probably from the opposite direction. The cycle never stops. You look once more at the road, a straight, endless line of dust disappearing into the violet horizon. And you think of it not as a path, but as a thread that holds the empire together. A thread you help maintain, one hoofbeat at a time. You stretch, let the lamp smoke curl into the evening, and smile faintly. For now, everything is in motion, everything is connected. The empire still speaks, and you, quietly, keep it talking. Night settles slowly across the plateau, the kind of blue-black sky that feels too large for any single empire to claim. You sit just outside the way station, back against the wall, listening to the rhythmic sigh of horses and the occasional crackle from the brazier. The day's heat has finally faded, replaced by a cool wind that smells faintly of wild thyme. It's quiet now, almost too quiet. But you know that somewhere out there, another courier is still riding, always riding. You close your eyes and picture it. A lone figure on horseback, hunched over against the chill, racing through moonlight. The image feels timeless, mythic, like something that's been happening forever. And in a way, it has. The Persians didn't just invent this, they perfected it. They turned motion into order. Inside the station, a clay tablet sits on the table, drying by the fire. You glance at it again. The message came from Susa this morning and will continue west at dawn. The symbols look so neat and harmless, yet somewhere in those wedges might be a decree that changes lives. Taxes raised, borders redrawn, a name erased from the king's record. It's strange how quietly power travels, wrapped in clay, carried by sweat and hooves. You remember once overhearing a Greek trader marvel at the system, calling it the empire's veins. He wasn't wrong. Without these routes, these stations, these endless riders, even Darius the Great would be just another man shouting into the wind. Communication was what made Persia more than territory. It made it a living thing. But there's something else that runs along the royal road too, something harder to measure: gossip. No empire is immune to rumor. You hear it all. Whispers about rebellious satraps, mysterious new taxes, the queen's latest jewelry, or whether the king's falcon can really catch a gazelle mid-flight. One courier once swore he'd carried a secret message written in invisible ink made from goat's milk. Historians still argue whether such invisible inks existed that early, but the couriers certainly believed it. You chuckle softly, remembering how he tried to prove it. He'd warmed the clay over a candle until it cracked. The only thing that appeared was his own panic as his supervisor caught him in the act. The night deepens. A few stars appear, sharp, cold, countless. You find the constellation the Magi call the Archer. The Persians used the stars not only for omens, but for timekeeping. Out here, far from temples or cities, couriers used constellations to pace their rides, to judge how much darkness they had left before dawn. You try it now, counting slow breaths, matching them to the flicker of firelight. It's almost hypnotic. Then, just when you've started to drift, the silence breaks, the faint, unmistakable rhythm of hooves. You stand and squint toward the eastern bend. A flicker of movement, a rider again, the third today. His silhouette sways with exhaustion. When he reaches you, he barely speaks, just slides off his horse and gestures to the tablet pouch. You help him dismount, and the smell of travel hits you, leather, sweat, and dust baked into skin. You hand him a fresh water skin. "From Ecbatana," he says weakly, voice almost lost to the wind. His eyes look glazed, like he hasn't slept in 2 days. You nod and take the packet, passing him bread and dates. He eats like a ghost, mechanical, silent. After a moment, he mumbles, "They say the king's moving the court south again." You raise an eyebrow. "Because of the heat?" you ask. He shrugs. "Because of the omens," he says, then stares into the fire for a long time before adding, "Or maybe because someone sent a message they shouldn't have." You don't press him for details. In this job, curiosity is the first luxury to die. You just hand him a blanket and tell him to rest before dawn. As he sleeps, you sit beside the fire, thinking about what he said. Omens, rebellions, forbidden messages. It all sounds dramatic, but it's the kind of drama you'll never see up close. You're the quiet cog in a vast, whispering wheel. Still, part of you wonders what those sealed tablets hide. Maybe the Empire's strength doesn't just depend on how quickly messages travel, but how well secrets stay buried. When the horizon starts paling again, you wake the courier gently. He thanks you in that half-awake mumble common to the perpetually exhausted, mounts a new horse, and disappears westward. You watch him vanish into the sunrise, the light catching on the metal clasp of his satchel until he's gone, swallowed by the road's golden dust. The rest of the morning unfolds slowly. A shepherd passes with his flock, and you exchange polite nods. The sheep look as disinterested in empire as you feel. Darius, your eternally sleepy coworker, tries to entertain himself by timing how long it takes ants to cross the stable threshold. You joke that if he measured fast enough, he could replace the couriers entirely. He laughs, says, "Only if the ants unionize." It's not a glamorous life, but it's steady, and steady is its own kind of peace. The Persian Empire is 1,000 contradictions. Palaces of marble and fields of mud, gold crowns and broken sandals. But this road holds it all together. Sometime around midday, a merchant caravan stops to rest. They're a colorful lot, carpets rolled like scrolls, camels adorned with beads. You share a little water and hear about their journey from Sardis. They complain about bandits near the Zagros passes, about corrupt toll collectors, and about the price of dates tripling since spring. Then one of them leans close and says, "You know, they say the couriers carry more than messages these days." You raise an eyebrow, playing along. "Oh?" He nods. "Gold? Secrets? Sometimes prisoners." He pauses for effect. "Once, a satrap's heart." You blink. As in, literally? He grins, teeth white against dust-streaked skin. "Who knows? Historians will argue, I suppose." You laugh softly, the kind of laugh that says you both know it's nonsense, but enjoy pretending it's not. When the caravan leaves, their wheels cutting new grooves into the road, you sit quietly for a while, watching the horizon tremble with heat. The royal road is like a living story. It holds the prints of kings and farmers, horses and sandals, lies and truths. You wonder if centuries from now, when the road is just a ruin, someone will dig up one of these clay tablets and try to guess what it meant. Maybe they'll imagine your hands holding it, this exact moment frozen in dust. By dusk, you're back in the stable, the lamps flickering. The wind smells of distant rain. You think about all the unseen riders crossing plains and mountains tonight, each one carrying a fragment of the Empire's voice. You imagine their silhouettes against the moonlight, like sparks on a thread, connecting the vastness. You lie down on the cot, exhausted but content. The faint rumble of hooves echoes somewhere far away, blending with the night's hum. You close your eyes and think, this is what connection feels like. Not loud, not heroic, just endless motion in the dark, carrying words from one heartbeat to another. You smile before sleep takes you, whispering to no one in particular, "May the road never end." The morning greets you with a soft, almost imperceptible haze. You step outside, stretching, and the royal road unfolds ahead like a ribbon of muted gold dust. The horizon wavers in the heat, and for a moment you imagine it's a mirage. But no, the road is real, and so is the empire that depends on it. Today, your journey brings you to one of the less glamorous, but surprisingly vital facets of the Persian messaging network, the relay stations themselves. This station is smaller than the others you've seen, tucked into a fold of hills near the borderlands of Media and Persis. Its walls are rough-hewn stone, thick enough to fend off sudden winds or wandering bandits, and low enough to let you hear everything happening outside. Horses paw the dirt, tails flicking lazily, ears swiveling at the smallest sounds. The smell is a mix of hay, dry earth, and the faint tang of smoke from the central hearth. A man named Artemis greets you. His face is sun-darkened, eyes sharp as flint. "You've been on the road before," he says, "but here we keep the rhythm alive. Every station is a pulse. Without it, the message dies." You nod, sensing the weight of his words. In the Persian system, each relay station isn't just a pit stop. It's a lifeline, a carefully maintained hub that ensures continuity across thousands of miles. Inside, the stable is organized chaos. Horses of every size and temperament line the stalls, some resting, some pawing impatiently. Each is labeled with its mileage and riding history. These aren't ordinary horses, Artemis explains. They are trained for speed, endurance, and temperament. A panicked horse can ruin a message. Sometimes it's not the rider, but the beast that carries responsibility. You stroke one of the animals, its coat surprisingly soft, and marvel at how these creatures have become extensions of the empire itself. The station's daily rhythm is hypnotic in its consistency. Couriers arrive, swap mounts, pass along messages, and vanish in the dust. Others tend the stables, repair saddles, check pouches, and keep the lamps burning for night travelers. You notice a small clay tablet drying on a shelf, cuneiform inscriptions still sharp. It is a reminder that the empire is as much written as it is ridden, a combination of ink, hoofbeats, and carefully measured distances. You follow Artemis to a low platform where incoming riders are received. He demonstrates the process. A rider arrives, dismounts, and hands over the tablet or pouch. Another courier immediately mounts a fresh horse and continues the journey. The transition takes only minutes. Every second counts. A delay is not tolerated, he says, because the empire cannot pause. And remember, messages are not always benign. Sometimes they warn of revolts, invasions, or famine. That is why speed is sacred. As you help adjust saddles and secure pouches, you notice an older courier resting against the wall, a thin leather strap cutting across his shoulder. He tells stories of past rides, racing through the Zagros Mountains, evading bandits in Anatolia, carrying letters that could alter the fate of an entire province. He chuckles at some of the less dangerous adventures, like smuggling figs past a customs post or outrunning a particularly stubborn donkey. Historians still argue whether these tales are embellished or purely the product of oral tradition, but the truth seems irrelevant. The stories live because they inspire those who follow the route. In a quiet corner, you see one of the more unusual aspects of the station, a small, nearly hidden kiln. Here, they fire clay tablets to preserve the most critical messages. It's fascinating how this system blends permanence with speed. Some messages must reach their destination fast, carried by hoofbeats. Others must endure for centuries, baked and sealed in clay. A few tablets even hold tiny coded messages that only the intended recipient can interpret. You marvel at the ingenuity. Outside, the wind carries the faint echo of distant hooves. Another courier is approaching, the rhythmic thunder of hooves growing steadily louder. The station comes alive in anticipation. A young apprentice hurries to prepare a fresh horse, while Artemis checks the pouch and its seal. Everything is timed, precise, like a well-rehearsed orchestra. Even the smallest error, a delayed horse, a dropped tablet, could ripple down the road, slowing the empire's heartbeat. You pause for a moment, imagining the scale. Hundreds of stations like this, spaced at regular intervals across thousands of kilometers. Couriers and horses moving ceaselessly, messages relayed, crises averted, orders executed. The Persian Empire is not just an expanse of land, it's a meticulously synchronized network, alive because of human and animal dedication. A courier arrives just as you are reflecting on this. He is pale, sweat-streaked with dust, but determined. The handoff is smooth. Tablet exchanged, horse mounted, and he vanishes westward. The road already swallows him, leaving only a faint cloud of dust behind. Artemis watches the horizon and nods. "This is our work," he says quietly. "We are not kings or generals. We do not carve monuments. But the empire survives because of our hands, our horses, our vigilance. Each relay station, each rider is a promise kept. You realize, as the sun sets and the lamps are lit, that the empire's true power isn't in walls, gold, or armies. It's in these quiet stations, in the rhythm of hoofbeats, the soft scratch of a stylus, and the meticulous care of those who ensure messages travel uninterrupted. It is patience, endurance, and precision that hold Persia together. That night, as you lie on a cot in the station, the scent of hay and warm leather surrounding you, you understand the strange intimacy of this work. You are part of something vast, ancient, and ongoing. Each horse, each tablet, each rider contributes to a living network, a heartbeat that stretches across mountains, deserts, and rivers. Somewhere far away, a message you touch today will change the course of a city, a satrapy, maybe even history itself. And all you did was help it along its way, quietly, faithfully. That's the remarkable beauty of it. The next morning greets you with a thin veil of mist drifting over the road, softening the harsh lines of hills and distant trees. The royal road stretches ahead, straight and stubborn, as if daring you to keep up. Today, your focus shifts slightly from the couriers themselves to the intricate methods used to safeguard messages along their journey. After all, the empire can only function if what is written arrives intact and secret. You follow Artemis, the station master, to a small outbuilding behind the stables. Its wooden walls are plain, almost unremarkable, but inside lies the tools of a quieter battle: sealing wax, signet rings, and a variety of small implements designed to prevent tampering. He places a clay tablet on the table and shows you the process. First, the scribe's message is written carefully in cuneiform, each wedge-shaped mark deliberate. Then, the tablet is allowed to dry until it's firm but not brittle. Finally, a thin layer of clay is pressed over it to act as a protective seal. You see, Artemis explains, the seal is everything. If it breaks, the recipient knows someone else has handled it. If it stays intact, the king's words remain unbroken. He taps the tablet gently, the soft clink of clay ringing in the quiet room. Sometimes we even use multiple seals for particularly sensitive messages. Historians still argue whether these double seals were ever really needed or if it was just tradition, but we do it anyway. It's better to be cautious. You pick up one of the smaller tablets, impressed by the precision of the seal. You press lightly with your thumb and feel the faint ridges of the king's emblem. There's an odd intimacy in handling a message that might dictate the fate of a province, a satrap, or even a rebellion. The power isn't in the ink, but in the faith that it will survive the journey. Artemis then shows you parchment scrolls, sealed in wax with the king's insignia. Unlike clay, these scrolls are lighter and easier to carry over long distances, but they are far more vulnerable. A sudden rainstorm, a spilled bucket of water, or a careless mule can ruin the contents. That's why the couriers carry extra copies when the message is crucial, he says, and why the seals matter so much. They're proof that the message hasn't been tampered with. You can't help but think about the logistics. Imagine coordinating hundreds of riders, multiple relay stations, and the careful preparation of both clay tablets and parchment scrolls, all while keeping the empire running smoothly. It's dizzying, yet somehow it works. The empire thrives because of these invisible checks and balances. Artemis leans closer and lowers his voice. Some messages are coded. Certain letters or words are deliberately altered or written in ciphers. Only the intended recipient can read them. He pulls out a small scroll with strange, looping symbols. This one, he says, contains instructions for the satraps along the eastern frontier. Too dangerous if it falls into the wrong hands. You trace the patterns with your eyes, feeling the deliberate obscurity. It's fascinating and a little unsettling to think that entire provinces might hinge on the ability to read or misread these signs. Outside, the wind picks up, rustling the tents and fluttering stray papers. You glance down the royal road, imagining a courier charging toward the horizon, pouch pressed to chest, oblivious to the secrets they carry. The system works because trust is absolute. The rider must not open the message, the next station must handle it carefully, the horses must stay alert. One weak link could unravel the entire chain. Artemis smiles faintly. Some think we're paranoid, but it's survival. The Empire is built on information, and information is fragile. One wrong step and a revolt, a failed tax collection, or a missed warning could change everything. You nod, understanding the weight of his words. Even the smallest scribbled wedge can ripple through the Empire like a stone dropped in a pond. Later, he shows you a clever trick. Some tablets and scrolls have false covers or decoys. A courier might carry a pouch with extra, meaningless messages to distract potential thieves. You hold one such tablet, feeling its weight and texture. It's ordinary, but it hides nothing. Its value is in deception. The ingenuity of these methods amazes you. Even thousands of years later, you can't help but admire the sheer thought that went into keeping messages safe. By late afternoon, the station hums quietly. Couriers arrive and depart, horses rest and eat, tablets and scrolls are inspected and resealed. You realize that the beauty of this system isn't just speed, it's careful choreography. Every action is measured, repeated, and perfected. Even the casual passerby senses the rhythm, the pulse of an empire maintained through tiny, meticulous acts. You pause near the stables, watching a young rider mount a fresh horse. His eyes are bright, and there's a slight tremor in his hands, not from fear, but from the thrill of responsibility. He holds a sealed scroll against his chest, and for a fleeting moment, you imagine what it contains. Orders, intelligence, personal messages. He rides off, hooves clattering against stone and dust, and you feel the invisible threads stretching across the empire, connecting distant cities, villages, and provinces. As night falls, the station quiets. You light a small lamp, letting its warm glow mingle with the cool night air. Artemis inspects the final batch of messages, his hands moving deftly over tablets and scrolls, checking seals and ensuring every word is secure. You sit nearby, marveling at how these ordinary acts preserve the extraordinary. It's clear now, the Empire doesn't just rely on strength or wealth. It relies on trust, diligence, and ingenuity. And while kings may be remembered for conquests and palaces, the couriers, scribes, and station masters ensure but the empire's words and its power endure. You lie down later on the cot, the smell of ink, clay, and horses filling your senses. The hum of distant hooves and the faint whisper of the wind through the hills lull you toward sleep. You think of the messages, still en route, still holding secrets that could reshape the world. And in that quiet, you understand the fragility and brilliance of the system, the human heartbeat behind the Persian Empire's pulse. The morning sun creeps lazily over the horizon, bathing the hills in pale gold. You step outside, squinting against the brightness, and the royal road stretches endlessly ahead, faintly shimmering in the heat. Today, your focus turns to the challenges that threaten the delivery of messages. Bandits, weather, and the sheer expanse of the Persian Empire itself. It's one thing to admire the couriers and stations. It's another to understand what they endure to keep the empire talking. You walk along the edge of the road, feeling the warm dust rise under your sandals. Artemis joins you, carrying a fresh water skin. Not every day is smooth, he says, his voice low. The empire is vast, but the threats are constant. You nod, aware that while the royal road appears tame, it slices through deserts, mountains, and swamps that are anything but forgiving. The first challenge is obvious: bandits. They lurk near passes and oases, often waiting for isolated riders. The couriers are trained to evade rather than fight, though some carry small daggers or clubs in emergencies. You remember a story one of the older riders told you. A bandit tried to seize a pouch full of tax records, and the courier simply whipped his horse into a zigzag, slipping away while the would-be thief tumbled into a ditch. You laugh softly, part amusement, part admiration. Historians still argue whether banditry along the royal road was as widespread as travelers claimed, but it's clear that fear of ambush shaped both training and timing. Next comes weather, an unpredictable companion on these long stretches. You imagine a courier caught in a sudden desert storm, sand whipping into eyes and nostrils, horses stumbling over hidden rocks. Or the Zagros Mountains in winter, snow and ice turning a swift ride into a perilous crawl. Rain, snow, and searing sun all conspire against the messenger. Yet somehow, day after day, messages move forward. The system accounts for this. Extra horses, relay stations positioned at strategic intervals, and riders trained to anticipate the elements. As you continue walking, you notice a small creek cutting across the road. A courier would have to slow his horse here, gauge the depth, and sometimes even wade through. You imagine a rider balancing clay tablets against his chest, sweat mixing with rain, mud squelching underfoot. It's exhausting just to picture. And yet, the message must move. The empire cannot pause, even for a single flood or mudslide. You hear the distant drum of hooves and see a rider cresting a hill, the wind catching his cloak. He carries a pouch sealed with wax and a small emblem of the king. His eyes are sharp, scanning the road, alert for any sign of danger. He passes the creek with practiced ease, the horse's hooves barely sinking into the mud. You admire the skill, imagining how many hours of training and experience have prepared him for this simple yet perilous task. Artemis leads you to a low stone wall overlooking a narrow pass. This is one of the trickier spots, he says. Bandits, wildlife, weather all converge here. We keep extra horses and riders stationed nearby. Sometimes a single rider must cover 20, 30, even 40 kilometers before the next relay. You feel a shiver, not from cold, but from the sheer endurance required. These riders are incredible, almost superhuman. He gestures to the horizon. And then there are the unknowns: diseases, disputes, political unrest. A courier might arrive at a station only to find it abandoned, destroyed, or under siege. In those moments, judgment is everything. Historians still argue how often this actually happened, but you can see why the system built in redundancy. Every message has a route, every route has a backup. A pair of riders arrive at the pass, carrying identical messages on separate horses. You watch as they briefly confer, exchange pouches, and split off. This redundancy is genius. Even if one rider falls, the message continues. You imagine a tablet traveling through storms, across mountains, dodging bandits, and still arriving intact. It feels miraculous, almost like magic, though it's really just preparation, discipline, and sheer determination. You wander closer to the roadside, noticing small markers embedded in the earth. These are milestones, counting distance, reminding riders how far they've traveled and how far remains. Each one is precise, a tiny monument to order in a vast, chaotic landscape. The Persians understood that information travels better when you measure the path. You run your fingers over a stone, imagining the hands that carved it centuries ago. By mid-afternoon, the sun is high, the air thick and dry. Another courier races past, kicking up dust that makes your eyes water. His pace is relentless, and yet he appears calm, almost meditative. You realize that endurance isn't just physical, it's mental. These men must maintain focus through long, monotonous stretches where nothing happens but distance and repetition. A misstep, a moment of distraction, could ruin everything. Later, you watch as a courier arrives at the relay station, exhausted but triumphant. He hands off the pouch to the next rider, who mounts a fresh horse and continues westward. The cycle repeats, seamless and silent. You note the subtle gestures, a tap of the hand, a nod, the careful inspection of seals. It's a choreography honed over decades, even centuries. As evening falls, you sit on a low wall, the wind carrying scents of grass, dust, and smoke from distant villages. You reflect on the fragility of the system. Bandits, weather, accidents, illness, all capable of stopping a message. Yet somehow, the messages endure. They cross the empire like veins carrying lifeblood, relentless, unbroken. You realize the Persian Empire is less about the grandeur of palaces or armies, and more about these silent, persistent threads. Every rider, every relay station, every carefully sealed tablet contributes to the invisible network that keeps the empire alive. And you, standing here at this dusty pass, feel like you've glimpsed the extraordinary machinery of patience, skill, and endurance that moves the world. The sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in muted reds and purples. Couriers arrive and depart in fading light, shadows stretching long across the road. You feel the rhythm of their work in your own heartbeat, the pulse of the empire, steady and constant. And as night falls, the first stars appear, reflecting off the dust, the horses, and the worn stone of the royal road. You lie down under the sky, the scent of horses and clay in your nose, and imagine the countless messages still racing across the land, each one carrying the weight of kingdoms. Dawn creeps quietly over the hills, softening the sharp edges of the royal road. You stretch, the cool morning air filling your lungs, and notice how different the world looks in this gentle light. Everything seems slower, almost forgiving, and yet the empire is already awake. Horses neigh softly, a distant donkey brays, and the rhythmic pounding of hooves announces the next courier approaching from the east. Today, your attention turns to the human element behind the messages, the riders themselves, their lives, fears, and odd little routines that make this immense network function. You watch the courier as he arrives at the station, his cloak dust-streaked and frayed at the edges. There's a quiet dignity to his exhaustion, the way his shoulders slump, yet his eyes remain sharp, scanning the surroundings for danger or instruction. You realize that these riders are both fragile and formidable, a curious combination of endurance and vulnerability. One misstep, a misjudged river crossing, a startled horse, a sudden illness, and a message could vanish into the dust forever. Inside the station, Artemis greets the rider with the practiced efficiency of someone who's seen this exchange hundreds of times. The handoff is silent but precise. A clay tablet is transferred, seals inspected, horses exchanged. You notice the subtleties, the gestures that speak volumes, the slight nod, the careful adjustment of the saddle, the soft click of a clasp. These couriers live in a world where efficiency is sacred and every second counts. You follow the rider to a small resting area behind the stables, where he loosens the straps of his pack and wipes sweat from his brow. He tells you stories of distant stations, Susa, Ekbatana, Sardis, and the landscapes between. There are deserts, mountains, forests, and rivers, each posing its own challenges. You lean against the wall, listening, fascinated by the rhythm of his words, the gentle cadence of someone who has spent countless hours in solitude, thinking, surviving, and moving the empire forward. Some of the riders have rituals that are almost superstitious. One always touches the hilt of his dagger before mounting. Another murmurs the same phrase under his breath every morning. Historians still argue whether these practices were practical or purely psychological, but you notice how much they help maintain focus and calm. Even the smallest habit becomes a lifeline in a world defined by motion and risk. You notice the younger riders, eager but inexperienced, trying to mimic the older ones. They stumble over saddles, misjudge distances, or misinterpret instructions. You offer a quiet correction here, a tip there, and see their eyes light up with understanding. There's a subtle mentorship that underpins the system. Knowledge passed orally, gestures repeated, mistakes quietly corrected. The empire survives not only because of infrastructure, but because wisdom is shared along the road. Later, the older rider takes you aside and shows you the secret markings they sometimes leave for each other along the route. A scratch on a tree, a small rock out of place, a clay fragment at the edge of a path. All cues that only trained riders recognize. These signals indicate hazards, relay station availability, or even political unrest in certain regions. You marvel at this hidden language, the subtle intelligence woven into the landscape. It's like a secret conversation across hundreds of miles, invisible to everyone else. You ask him about the dangers that aren't obvious. Storms, wild animals, unexpected conflicts. He shrugs and smiles faintly. You get used to it, he says. Mostly, you just move, step after step, mile after mile. Pay attention, breathe, trust your horse, trust the road. His simplicity belies the complexity of what he does. You watch him mount his horse again, eyes fixed forward, and you realize that courage is not about heroics, but about quiet persistence. By midday, more couriers arrive in succession, each bearing messages of varying importance. Some are mundane, supply reports, tax tallies, weather updates. Others are urgent, cryptic, or secretive. You feel a thrill as you watch the exchange, the seamless choreography of humans and horses ensuring that nothing is lost. The relay stations are not just buildings, they are sanctuaries of trust, the glue that holds the empire together. You notice that riders often carry personal items, small charms, scraps of cloth, or carved figurines. These tokens remind them of home, loved ones, or faith. Even in the midst of their relentless duty, they maintain a connection to the world beyond the royal road. You find yourself smiling, imagining a rider clutching a tiny wooden horse while charging through a desert pass, whispering a prayer under his breath. As the afternoon heat rises, the stations seem almost to hum with motion. Horses feeding, riders exchanging messages, the faint creak of wooden doors, the shuffle of boots on stone. You realize that this hum is more than background noise. It's the heartbeat of the empire. Every movement, however small, contributes to a vast, living system that stretches from coast to coast, valley to mountain, city to village. Later, in a rare quiet moment, you walk along the edge of the station, noticing the riders resting in the shade, their horses tethered nearby. One older courier hums softly, the melody faint and soothing, while a younger rider sketches small symbols in the dust, practicing ciphers. You feel a sense of wonder at the human ingenuity, endurance, and quiet devotion that keeps the system moving. Without these people, the royal road would be nothing more than a dusty trail. By evening, the sky is a soft orange-pink, the air carrying a hint of smoke and dry grass. Riders mount their horses one last time before nightfall, heading toward the next station. You watch the dust swirl behind them, the subtle clatter of hooves fading into the distance. You reflect on the intricate web of human effort, trust, and care that sustains this system, and you feel a profound respect for the men who ride day and night, carrying messages that shape the empire. As darkness falls, you sit quietly on the edge of the stables, listening to the soft snorts of horses and the occasional flap of a bird's wings. You think about the lives of these riders, the rhythm of the road, the constant hum of movement, and the extraordinary persistence required to maintain it all. Somewhere out there, a message you helped touch today will continue its journey, moving the empire forward, unseen but essential. And in that quiet, you finally understand the immense human heart behind the royal road. Dawn creeps quietly over the hills, softening the sharp edges of the royal road. You stretch, the cool morning air filling your lungs, and notice how different the world looks in this gentle light. Everything seems slower, almost forgiving, and yet the empire is already awake. Horses neigh softly, a distant donkey brays, and the rhythmic pounding of hooves announces the next courier approaching from the east. Today, your attention turns to the human element behind the messages, the riders themselves, their lives, fears, and odd little routines that make this immense network function. You watch the courier as he arrives at the station, his cloak dust-streaked and frayed at the edges. There's a quiet dignity to his exhaustion, the way his shoulders slump yet his eyes remain sharp, scanning the surroundings for danger or instruction. You realize that these riders are both fragile and formidable, a curious combination of endurance and vulnerability. One misstep, a misjudged river crossing, a startled horse, a sudden illness, and a message could vanish into the dust forever. Inside the station, Artemis greets the rider with the practiced efficiency of someone who's seen this exchange hundreds of times. The handoff is silent but precise. A clay tablet is transferred, seals inspected, horses exchanged. You notice the subtleties, the gestures that speak volumes, the slight nod, the careful adjustment of the saddle, the soft click of a clasp. These couriers live in a world where efficiency is sacred and every second counts. You follow the rider to a small resting area behind the stables, where he loosens the straps of his pack and wipes sweat from his brow. He tells you stories of distant stations, Susa, Ecbatana, Sardis, and the landscapes between. There are deserts, mountains, forests, and rivers, each posing its own challenges. You lean against the wall, listening, fascinated by the rhythm of his words, the gentle cadence of someone who has spent countless hours in solitude, thinking, surviving, and moving the empire forward. Some of the riders have rituals that are almost superstitious. One always touches the hilt of his dagger before mounting. Another murmurs the same phrase under his breath every morning. Historians still argue whether these practices were practical or purely psychological, but you notice how much they help maintain focus and calm. Even the smallest habit becomes a lifeline in a world defined by motion and risk. You notice the younger riders, eager but inexperienced, trying to mimic the older ones. They stumble over saddles, misjudge distances, or misinterpret instructions. You offer a quiet correction here, a tip there, and see their eyes light up with understanding. There's a subtle mentorship that underpins the system. Knowledge passed orally, gestures repeated, mistakes quietly corrected. The empire survives not only because of infrastructure, but because wisdom is shared along the road. Later, the older rider takes you aside and shows you the secret markings they sometimes leave for each other along the route. A scratch on a tree, a small rock out of place, a clay fragment at the edge of a path. All cues that only trained riders recognize. These signals indicate hazards, relay station availability, or even political unrest in certain regions. You marvel at this hidden language, the subtle intelligence woven into the landscape. It's like a secret conversation across hundreds of miles, invisible to everyone else. You ask him about the dangers that aren't obvious: storms, wild animals, unexpected conflicts. He shrugs and smiles faintly. You get used to it, he says. Mostly you just move, step after step, mile after mile. Pay attention, breathe, trust your horse, trust the road. His simplicity belies the complexity of what he does. You watch him mount his horse again, eyes fixed forward, and you realize that courage is not about heroics, but about quiet persistence. By midday, more couriers arrive in succession, each bearing messages of varying importance. Some are mundane: supply reports, tax tallies, weather updates. Others are urgent, cryptic, or secretive. You feel a thrill as you watch the exchange, the seamless choreography of humans and horses ensuring that nothing is lost. The relay stations are not just buildings, they are sanctuaries of trust, the glue that holds the empire together. You notice that riders often carry personal items, small charms, scraps of cloth, or carved figurines. These tokens remind them of home, loved ones, or faith. Even in the midst of their relentless duty, they maintain a connection to the world beyond the royal road. You find yourself smiling, imagining a rider clutching a tiny wooden horse while charging through a desert pass, whispering a prayer under his breath. As the afternoon heat rises, the stations seem almost to hum with motion. Horses feeding, riders exchanging messages, the faint creak of wooden doors, the shuffle of boots on stone. You realize that this hum is more than background noise. It's the heartbeat of the empire. Every movement, however small, contributes to a vast, living system that stretches from coast to coast, valley to mountain, city to village. Later, in a rare, quiet moment, you walk along the edge of the station, noticing the riders resting in the shade, their horses tethered nearby. One older courier hums softly, the melody faint and soothing, while a younger rider sketches small symbols in the dust, practicing ciphers. You feel a sense of wonder at the human ingenuity, endurance, and quiet devotion that keeps the system moving. Without these people, the royal road would be nothing more than a dusty trail. By evening, the sky is a soft orange-pink, the air carrying a hint of smoke and dry grass. Riders mount their horses one last time before nightfall, heading toward the next station. You watch the dust swirl behind them, the subtle clatter of hooves fading into the distance. You reflect on the intricate web of human effort, trust, and care that sustains this system, and you feel a profound respect for the men who ride day and night, carrying messages that shape the empire. As darkness falls, you sit quietly on the edge of the stables, listening to the soft snorts of horses and the occasional flap of a bird's wings. You think about the lives of these riders, the rhythm of the road, the constant hum of movement, and the extraordinary persistence required to maintain it all. Somewhere out there, a message you helped touch today will continue its journey, moving the empire forward, unseen but essential. And in that quiet, you finally understand the immense human heart behind the royal road. The morning is unusually calm, the kind of calm that seems to stretch the horizon and slow time itself. You stand on the edge of the royal road, watching the sun gild the hills with soft amber light. Today, your focus shifts to the culmination of the system, the journey's end, and the arrival of messages. After thousands of miles, countless riders, and endless relay stations, these words finally reach their intended hands. It's a quiet triumph, almost invisible, yet it sustains the empire in ways few can see. You follow the final rider into a bustling city station, where the air is thick with the mingled scents of bread baking, horses feeding, and the faint tang of clay tablets. Couriers arrive from every direction, some dusty and exhausted, others surprisingly fresh. Each one hands over their carefully sealed pouch to waiting clerks, who immediately inspect the seals, verify the contents, and record the delivery. It is a precise choreography, every action rehearsed and refined over decades. You watch with fascination, realizing that the journey is only complete once the message is verified and acknowledged. Artemis joins you, a faint smile tugging at his weathered face. "This is the reward," he says softly. "Not gold, not praise, but the knowledge that the Empire's words have arrived intact." You nod, sensing the weight of his words. For the riders, the scribes, and the station masters, the end of the journey is both relief and fulfillment. They may never see the consequences of the messages they deliver, yet their labor ensures order, connection, and continuity across thousands of miles. You notice a young clerk opening a clay tablet. The wedge-shaped impressions are crisp, unbroken. He reads aloud, his voice steady and deliberate, and you catch fragments of trade instructions, tax assessments, and diplomatic correspondence. It strikes you how ordinary the words seem, yet their delivery has required extraordinary coordination, endurance, and trust. Historians still argue how much of the system relied on redundancy versus sheer skill, but it's undeniable that the Persian Empire survived, in part, because of this network. A courier leans against the wall, his horse tethered nearby, nuzzling his shoulder. He looks exhausted yet serene, the subtle pride of a job well done etched on his face. You approach and ask about the most unusual messages he's carried. He chuckles softly. Sometimes they're just mundane numbers, taxes, supplies. Sometimes they're secrets, warnings, or instructions that could topple a city. And once I carried a small scroll hidden inside a baked fig. The messenger before me had eaten the figs and nearly ruined the letter. We laugh now, but I swear, at the time, I thought I'd be executed by the king. You grin, imagining the chaos of such a tiny object holding immense importance. Outside, the sun climbs higher, and the station buzzes with motion. Riders ready fresh horses, clerks organize tablets, and a new set of couriers prepare to continue the cycle. You realize that arrival is just a pause, a brief acknowledgement before the system shifts into motion again. Messages continue west, south, north, and east, unbroken and unyielding. The road never truly rests, just as the Empire never truly sleeps. You find a quiet corner and watch the flow of activity. There's an almost meditative quality to it. The gentle rhythm of hooves, the soft clink of clay, the murmur of voices exchanging codes and instructions. You notice the subtle interactions, the trust implicit in every gesture, the unspoken knowledge that a single mistake could ripple through the entire network. Yet the system endures, not because of magic or luck, but because of human ingenuity, discipline, and dedication. As afternoon wanes, the city station begins to empty. Couriers mount their horses and disappear down the road, the dust swirling behind them like ephemeral echoes. You trace their paths in your mind, imagining the mountains, deserts, rivers, and forests they will traverse. You think of the relay stations, the careful inspections, the seals, and the hidden messages. It's a vast, living system, moving silently, persistently, and faithfully across the Empire. Finally, you settle on a cot in the quiet corner of the station, the hum of activity fading around you. The smell of leather, hay, and baked clay lingers in the air, comforting and familiar. You close your eyes and picture the countless riders and messages still in motion, each one carrying authority, secrets, and the pulse of civilization itself. It's an astonishingly human achievement, built on small acts of endurance and care repeated over and over. The light softens outside, and a gentle evening breeze carries the faint scent of distant fields and smoke. You breathe deeply, letting your body relax and your mind trace the endless threads of the royal road. Each message, each rider, each horse represents the dedication that sustains an empire. And as your thoughts drift, the hum of distant hooves and the whisper of wind lull you toward a calm, restorative sleep. The empire's words have reached their destinations. The cycle continues, and for tonight, the road rests in quiet anticipation. You let your consciousness float along the path, feeling the continuity, the rhythm, and the quiet majesty of human perseverance. Every hoofbeat, every scribbled wedge, every careful inspection contributes to something greater than any one person, a living network that has endured across centuries. As you drift into the soft embrace of sleep, you imagine the royal road stretching endlessly, the dust glowing softly in the last light of day, and the couriers riding tirelessly, carrying the heartbeat of an empire. You feel content, secure, and part of something vast and enduring. Now, let your mind slow even further. The sun has dipped below the horizon, and the empire rests in quiet stillness. The dust settling on the road, the horses lying calmly in their stalls. You feel the warmth of the fading day and the cool whisper of the evening wind brushing against your skin. The distant hum of activity has faded to a soft rhythm, a gentle reminder that life, even in motion, can pause. Picture the road stretching beyond sight, silent now, each tablet and scroll resting in its place, each rider finally finding a moment to breathe. Imagine the clay, the ink, the carefully sealed messages lying undisturbed, carrying intentions and authority safely across the empire. You feel the weight of continuity, the beauty of countless small efforts joining to create a world bigger than any one individual. Let your body sink into the cot, muscles unclenching, eyes closing, ears attuned to the softest sounds. The wind whispers, the horses breathe, and the empire's pulse slows to a quiet heartbeat. Feel yourself drifting with it, carried gently along the royal road, through mountains, plains, and deserts, past relay stations and resting riders toward peaceful dreams. There is no rush, no urgency, just the timeless rhythm of effort, endurance, and human ingenuity. Every hoofbeat, every wedge in clay, every whisper of wind assures you that the world continues in harmony. Let the last thoughts of the day fade like the setting sun, leaving you in a gentle calm. Sleep now, wrapped in the vast, quiet embrace of history and the whispering roads of an empire that never truly sleeps. Peace is here. You are safe. Sweet dreams.